ink. Now,
Yeah.
This is the ink I use. I get it in Israel. It's called Hadar. My wife, who's a soferet, she was the first ever soferet in modern times.
Really?
Aviella.
A female scribe.
Barkley, female scribe.
Okay.
So she's my wife. It's quite an interesting household.
Wait. So we got to back up there. So, would an Orthodox synagogue accept a Torah scroll made by a female scribe? No. Would they accept a Megillah made by a female? Okay.
Well, most of them would. Most of them would, because there's lots of discussions. But the big giveaway is it says "Vatichtov Esther." Esther wrote. Okay. So you can't really argue with that one, because if Esther wrote it,
you can argue with anything if you want to.
She was. As far as I last checked, she was a lady.
You could say she ordered someone to write it. She
could have, and that's what some of the Orthodox will argue. I see.
But generally, Orthodox would accept a
female Megillah most.
And what about conservative Jews? You have that in the UK,
Masorti. So Masorti would probably accept, and that's fine. So we do. I work across the spectrum for everyone, and my wife works in a slightly narrower spectrum, depending on how modern and progressive that community is.
Okay.
So Hadar is the ink I like. She doesn't like it. She's got a different ink which is much shinier. I don't like it. I think if you're doing repairs, Hadar is really good because it's not quite as shiny.
Here. All right. I'm just reading the label here. Okay, they want you to water it down or to thin it, I guess.
To thin it down sometimes. And actually for the Tyburn Megillah, I did thin it down a bit because I was working with something that had... It's supposed to be the blackest of black, right? But the Tyburn had faded to a particular... And if I'd repaired it black, it would have looked ridiculous. So again, it's part of the conservation.
So the repairing that you were doing there is re-inking it? Meaning you're going
over the letters that are completely faded. And some of them have disappeared completely.
Okay. Now, going back to God's name, are you allowed to re-ink Yud He Vav He?
Yes, but again, with the right intention. And it also depends on
if it's faded.
If it's faded to grey, then or brown, then you probably don't. And it's still one. It's called Guf Echad. It's one body, right? The letter is complete. Then you don't actually need to go over it.
Okay.
If there are cracks in it, or bits have broken away, or bits have faded, or jumped off the skin, then you do.
I see.
If it fades to red, then the ink was probably not kosher in the first place.
Okay, if it fades to red, that's because there's iron. It's iron gall ink.
No, iron gall ink's fine. It's just that the recipe was wrong.
So tell us what the recipe.
So the recipe.
What's the secret recipe?
Guys,
you're going to hear it. The
secret recipes. There are many secret recipes, but they all start with these. And these are not Maltesers, as I quite often tell children. Maltesers are British chocolates. They look exactly like this. And they're not Maltesers because they're actually what's called gall nuts. So when you say iron gall, that's exactly what it was. It was iron sulfate, or copper sulfate, some people use. And this stuff, which is basically gall nuts.
So tell us how gall nuts, and in Hebrew that's afatzim.
And
how are these made?
They grow on oak trees. So the scribes go around and climb oak trees, and we pull these down. And
do you have those in the UK as well?
Yeah, we have them in the UK. These are actually picked in the UK in a local park. Yeah.
Wait, you went to a local park and picked those?
I went to a local park and picked these with my son when he was younger.
And tell us how the oak tree makes those.
So basically, the gall wasp stings the oak tree, and this is a swelling, and it's tannic acid. Basically, it's pure tannic acid. Plants its babies inside, and then the baby comes out, flies away. You can see
this is a product
you can't.
Wasps interacting with.
It's completely nature. It's natural, and that's the thing about Torah. Everything's natural, and you try to avoid. In fact, you try to avoid things that are metal if you can avoid them. You can't always, because some knives you have to use knives and scalpels. But I look at the scalpel in terms of healing because it's used in the hospital. Okay, but most metal implements you want to try and avoid because they're used for war. So you try and stick to the nature things. Okay. So this is you can see the gall wasp has gone. And
so there's a little hole in it. I don't know if they can see that here. There's actually a little hole with a wasp went out, and this is left behind, and this then is ground up into a powder,
right? Up into a powder. It's basically pure tannic acid. You mix it up with the iron sulfate. And this is mentioned. Gum arabic. Yeah. Some people add alcohol. Some people add honey. I have no idea why, because it doesn't seem to have any purpose. But it's in recipes. Yeah. And then and it's in the Talmud, and it's very
right. So the Talmud mentions afatzim, which are these gall nuts. And so this has been done for a very long
It
time.
has, although this wasn't the original ink. In fact, there were some scribes way back when who said, "Oh, no, you mustn't use this stuff."
And that's actually
you have to
discussed in
use
the Talmud.
black, which is basically
Right.
soot from boiling oil, so olive oil. When you collect the soot from the glass, that it was boiling, it was
Right, or
underneath, and then
right.
you turn that into slabs of ink.
Or from actual lamps that would become carbonized.
Yep.
And yeah, that's what's called carbon ink in the
So,
hard sciences.
And then there's there's a whole bunch of arguments over ink.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the statement in the Talmud is one rabbi says, I have a substance I can throw into the ink and it makes it permanent. And they then discuss, are we allowed to do this?
Because of the sotah, the ritual of the sotah.
Right.
Because
So explain that.
So the ritual of the sotah is the supposedly adulterous wife, and she has to eat this kind of noxious mix of earth and parchment and writing ink written on thing with the paragraph of the sotah.
And what's interesting about that is Maimonides says that specifically they write God's name Yud He Vav He and wash that off.
And they wash it off.
And
it's the only time you're allowed to damage God's name. And that's why the permanency of the ink was questioned, because you couldn't do that if
you can't wash it off.
You can't wash it off. You can make it very soggy and crack a bit, but you can't.
Well, and part of that is because it stains the actual parchment.
It sits quite proud, but it also sinks in to the parchment.
And I've seen examples where you talked about how they peel off a layer of parchment. I've seen examples where they peeled off a layer of parchment and you can still see ink underneath.
Because it's soaked in.
It's soaked in, exactly.
It depends on the recipe, basically.
Right. So what's your secret recipe?
So gall nuts.
No one will ever know.
It is literally, it's water and gall nuts and iron sulfate and gum arabic.
What is gum arabic?
Gum arabic is a resiny sap thingy.
That comes from some tree.
It comes from a tree, and it basically gives it an adhesive quality and a bounce. So it stretches, because remember, you're rolling.
Right.
And if you didn't have that in there, they just go boing.
It'd crack.
It would crack.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why a lot of mezuzot are actually not kosher, because they're written very cheaply on coated parchment, and the moment you roll it up, the ink cracks off.
Oh, wow.
So you think you're putting a kosher mezuzah up, and you're not.
Because okay. But you don't know because you haven't opened it up.
You don't know. So you haven't opened it up. And it's very important that you have a kosher mezuzah. And this is a giant mezuzah. Here is a giant mezuzah.
Did somebody actually use this?
So somebody, actually there are people, so some communal organisations will have a mezuzah this big.
Really?
I did one recently for the Alexander House, which is an interfaith peace house in Germany.
Oh, wow.
So I fixed the Alexander Torah. I also wrote a book about that one. I'll come to that later because it's very about the Shoah and the Holocaust. But basically this... somebody gave me a sample of some new cloth, and I thought, what am I going to do with this tiny bit of cloth? I wrote a giant mezuzah for show and tell.
Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah.
And this is using sort of all the extra tagin that some rabbis say.
So tell us what the tagin are.
So the tagin are decorative pieces. The rabbis say they're little daggers to ward off the demons, Satan, Ez, and Guts.
I've never heard that. Okay.
Right, Satan is Guts, which because they're the
letters
letters
that
they actually have the three tagin on, and the rabbis have this.
But some people say they have mystical meaning,
and some people say they have mystical meaning.
Okay.
Some people don't really understand the tagin particularly, but there are lots of rules